Hello everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, a GeneaVlogger, and on today's vlog, we will be looking into Mr. Beat's ancestors who were alive during the American Revolution. In episode 3, we briefly looked at Mary Galtry with through lines where we saw a whole bunch of DNA matches, 49 of them, who all descend from Mary E. Galtry and match Mr. Beat. And then in episode 4, we looked into the Galtry family and learned a bit more about Mary, her siblings, and her parents. So we're going to start tracing up from Mary's parents, who were Nathaniel and Elizabeth, and we're going to trace them back to some of their earliest days in America. And a big part of this we went over actually in the last episode, because when we looked at the information from Jennings County Library, what Sheila had sent, it included a 14-page document which had 4 generations of the family in these different types of family sheets, tracing the family back fairly far. So using that to correlate with what was on Ancestry, I was then able to have a fairly confident tree that we can then build off of and then go through the hints to correlate, possibly do some searching, and then any researching if we need to. Now here we have the family tree where Mary Galtry is the focal point. We see her parents, Nathaniel and Elizabeth. We see Elizabeth's parents, Patton Fitzgerald and Hannah McMarlin. But if anyone remembers from episode 4, it was mentioned that Elizabeth's parents weren't known, but I had mentioned that I found names that seemed to correlate, but I hadn't found any documentation to prove that. We're not going to go into it, but I just want to throw an aside, because even though there were people that had these names in there, if I wanted to ensure that I was confident they were truly Elizabeth's parents, I would need to do research to confirm that, get the documentation to correlate. But our focus right now is going to be on the Galtry side. As you can see, we do have Nathaniel Galtry here. We do also have his sister entered in along with her husband. But going back, we see that we have Paul William Galtry and Rachel E. Moffett. And we have some pretty good hints in here. So just pulling up the hints, we can see some really interesting stuff. One being that we see Paul William Galtry is not from Jennings, Indiana, which is where we were looking at the family in the past episode. We actually see that Paul William Galtry was born in New Jersey. And this is likely one of the reasons why at the Jennings County Library, Sheila wasn't able to pull up a whole lot about the Galtry family, because it's possible Paul William Galtry was one of the few of his family to move to Jennings County, Indiana. But just scrolling through and looking at what is available, we have an 1840 census in Steuben, New York, an 1830 census in Steuben, New York, and then we see a 1793 Bernards Township Powell Goltry in the New Jersey U.S. compiled census and census substitutes, which is an index, so there's not an actual document. So just pulling this one up to take a quick look, we can see that it's just a tax list. And since this is 1793, scrolling to the top, we see 1767 was when Paul was born, so he would have been a young man at this point. He would have been about 26 years old. But scrolling back down, we see that the oldest census that we can find where there's an actual image is the 1810 census. So in the 1810 census, he would have been 43. So here we have the census, and I know that not as many people are familiar with the 1810 census as they are with some of the later ones, but once you get back far enough, you'll find that a lot of censuses become very basic. So here we can see Paul Galtry, and what it's listing is it's listing the number of people that fit this certain column within the household. So I'm going to X out of this and look back at the indexing, and we see that they have it laid out. So free white persons, males under 10, there were 5 of them. Free white persons, males 10 through 15, 2 of them. 16 through 25, 1, etc. So it shows all of the people within the household. There are 8 total that are under 16 and 2 who are over 25, but there are 12 total number within the household. So this isn't as helpful genealogically, but it is very interesting to just get an idea of the family. And just like how Sheila put it, this was a large family, or as what she said, they were bunnies. So, but one thing that I always love to do is Google. And when you're getting this far back, if you have ancestors where you're getting a lot of relatives, it's possible that you have other relatives that have already done information about this family, and they may have a lot of great information. So when I did a Google search just on Paul William Galtry and Rachel Elizabeth Moffat, I found a really cool page. So here we have the web page Clan Moffat Genealogy Online. And this web page is based around the Scottish clan Moffat, which presumably Rachel Elizabeth Moffat would descend from. Now, this article was written by an M.E. Van Gordon, and I was not able to get in touch with him. So this page gives a really interesting look into Paul's life. The web page talks about how there's not a whole lot known about Paul's early years. He was born to an Oliver Goltry and a Helena Leanna Otten, and he grew up presumably in Bridgewater Township, which is in Somerset County, New Jersey. And then he was married in 1790 to Rachel Moffat while still living in Bridgewater Township. It seems that he moved to New York State by 1800 or 1801, which we saw before in those other censuses. I believe he was in Steuben, New York. And he was actually following one of his older brothers who had already moved to New York as well. By the time they moved to New York, Paul and Rachel already had 7 children, one who died in infancy, but they would eventually have 14 children total. While in New York, Paul Goltry manufactured looms, farming mills, and other articles, and it's said that he lived in a log house. He was apparently very worried that anyone would find out secrets of his work, so he actually had certain things encoded, kept things secret, and even his family members seemed to be forbidden from his workshop. His family stayed in New York, although they moved around a bit within New York, until 1829 when they made their way west to Jennings County, Indiana. And it's said that they made their way to Jennings County in a covered wagon that was being led by oxen. For Rachel Moffat, unfortunately, her ancestry is much harder to trace as well. This is a similar story to what we saw with Elizabeth Fitzgerald. The publications about her seem to indicate that there are no parents that can be confidently named for Rachel, although there are some presumed parents. One theory is that Rachel is the daughter of Captain William Moffat and Sarah Campbell. So if this is true, that means that Captain William Moffat would be one of Mr. Beat's revolutionary ancestors, or what's often called a Patriot ancestor. Captain Moffat had served in the 1st Battalion of the New Jersey Militia during the Revolutionary War, but it'll take more research to be able to confirm that he is an actual ancestor. Now, going back to the family tree on ancestry, we're going to start looking at Oliver Goltry II, and we're going to see where a lot of the information on this family comes from for these older generations. And we're going to see that it comes from a Bible which was actually passed down through multiple generations. So here we have an entry on Ancestry that was done on July 19, 2017 by Ramirez 2542. And it's a transcription by a Dorothy Stratford, who's the corresponding secretary of the Genealogical Society of New Jersey. And then this also mentions the Hunterdon County Historical Society of Fleming, New Jersey. This copy, along with a transcription of Oliver Goltry, the patriarch of the Goltry family of Somerset County, New Jersey, was sent to this person by a Mr. Hubert Brown. So this is great because not only are we getting some actual context for the family Bible, we're also getting some more information that we can look into. We can look into Dorothy Stratford, who's the secretary of the Genealogical Society of New Jersey and New Brunswick. We can look into the Hunterdon County Historical Society of Fleming, New Jersey. We can look for copies of Oliver Goltry, the patriarch of the Galtry family of Somerset County, New Jersey. And we can also just contact the person that posted this. But the main thing is that this gives us a lot of the information on the family and where it's coming from. So we have Oliver Goltry, it's his Bible. He was born in August of 17-something, but we do see Liddy Goltry, who would presumably be his wife, born February 1735. And then we see they generated and begat a whole bunch of children, including a Powell Goltry, born May 24th, 1767, who is Mr. Beats' ancestor. Now, this family Bible was handed down through a whole different branch of the family tree than Mr. Beats' tree, which we can see because it then follows the children of Oliver Goltry Jr., which makes sense because if we look, Oliver Goltry Jr. was the second born, but he was the firstborn son. So firstborn son makes sense he would inherit the family Bible. But this is giving great context for the information because when we click out of this and we look at what records are available, there really is not a whole lot. We do have abstract of a will, which is from 1779, and we have some different compiled census stuff, U.S. Census reconstructed records, but this is, 1790s and later. So when we look at the records, at least here, through our hints, the quick and easy stuff, there's not a whole lot. One thing that we can do, we can look at what records are available for Somerset County in New Jersey. But I'm sure many of you have noticed the dates of Oliver's birth and death, as well as his wife. And it's very apparent, including with Paul, that they were all alive during the Revolutionary War. And in 1777, it wasn't just an important year in the Revolution, it was also an extremely important year in the Galtry family. By January 1777, the war had been raging for some time. On December 26th of 1776, there had been the Battle of Trenton after Washington had sailed over the Delaware. And then just about a week later, the Battle of Princeton took place. At this time, Oliver Galtry's oldest son, Oliver, had joined the 1st New Jersey Regiment under Captain John Sebring and had also served under then Colonel Frederick Frelinghuysen. Oliver possibly even fighting at the Battle of Trenton and Battle of Princeton. But after the Battle of Princeton, Washington's army made their way north to Morristown, New Jersey, and they arrived just a few days after the Battle of Princeton on January 6, 1777. But after a surprise attack by the British on April 13, 1777, which would later become known as the Battle of Bound Brook, Washington decided to move the encampment to Somerset County, home of the Galtrys, and arrived on May 28th, staying until July 2nd. And this encampment became known as the Middlebrook encampment, and part of it was on the Galtry land. It is largely agreed upon that the first official flag of the United States was most likely unfurled for the first time at the Middlebrook encampment. So it's possible that the first official United States flag was flown on the land of Mr. Beats' Galtry ancestors. But only a month and a half after Washington's troops began their encampment, on February 28, 1777, Oliver Galtry died and left Helena a widow, looking over the 7 children that were still at home. Now, I tried to find any information on Oliver's death, and the only thing that I could was an abstract of his will from 1779, so 2 years after his death, and it really didn't give much information. So the cause of death is unknown. But because Helena would allow Washington's army to camp on her property, causing her depredation, she is now recognized as a patriot of the Revolution. Now, if you do find that you have a patriot ancestor just like Helena, what you can do is go to the DAR's website. They have a genealogy research page, and you can actually do a search for already accepted patriot ancestors. So here we have that search, and we're just going to type in Goltry and do a search, and she is the only Goltry. And we see it comes up, New Jersey, Patriotic Service, baptized February 23rd, 1735, Somerset County, New Jersey, death date 5/29/1821 in Bridgewater Township. Then we see service source. So this is the source that they are using to prove that there was some sort of service. So if we wanted to look further into what they think is the proving factor of that Helena is a patriot ancestor, we would want to go to the New Jersey State Archives, go to the rec group, and find the legislator series, petitions, resolutions, transactions, 1700C to 1845, box 24. And we can see service description, suffered depredation. Now, when we scroll down, we see associated applications and supplements. And we actually see those national numbers, the different associated applications and their supplements, are all connected to Paul. So they are all descendants of Helena through Paul, just like Mr. Beat. So we can click on this number and it will tell us more information on that application. So whoever submitted this application, they submitted for Henry Huke and Helena Lena Otten Goltry. We're actually going to look at a whole bunch of different ancestors of Mr. Beat who were Patriot ancestors. But before we do that, we're going to look at his Genie tree to look at some of these ancestors. So here we have the tree view, and what I've done is I went over to the settings and I set ancestors to 9 generations, and then I set it to direct ancestors only, so it's going to be a nice clean view. And then we're going to go and find the Galtry family. So I know they're over this way. And so just to get an idea, we have Mary Whitcomb, then Nathaniel, his parents Paul and Rachel. We see that we do have Captain William Moffat and Sarah Campbell connected here. We also see Patton Fitzgerald and Anna McMarlin connected. Again, whether or not those are true, we aren't sure. We would need to go through and confirm with documentation. But looking over to the left, we have some more Patriot ancestors. First, we have Richard Peck, born 1753. So going back over to the DAR website, we can look up Richard Peck. And there we go, 1753, Lyme, Connecticut. Spouse, Sarah Tennant and Elizabeth Chamberlain. So he had 2, and we look and we see, well, Richard Peck was married to Sarah Tennant. Sarah Tennant was Mr. Beat's ancestor. Then as we scroll over towards the right, we also see the Zickafus family. And specifically, we have Peter Zickafus, because we notice that the generations are a little bit older here. So when we go to Peter Zickafus, we're actually going to just do Zick. And there we go, Peter Zickafus. But you may run into this, future applicants must prove correct service. Well, why? Because the proof of service that's been used, that was established to create this person as a Patriot ancestor, has been deemed not valid any longer. Now, this could be any number of things. It could be that there was an application accepted where there was some faulty documentation. There might have been some new finding which completely negated what research was there. Or it just might be that the standards they had when this applicant was accepted just aren't the same today. So if you do find this, expect to have to do a bit more work to be able to prove that ancestor as a Patriot ancestor. Now, as we go over, we see that Mr. Beat actually descends from the Zickafus family twice. And the reason for this, if we notice, is that Marshall and Susanna were actually first cousins. And they were first cousins because George Zickafus was the brother of Mary Zickafus. And once you get back to this time, it's very common to find a lot of first cousin marriages, second cousin marriages, and even sometimes you'll find uncles marrying nieces and other sort of weird things that today we find very odd. Now, all of these ancestors are through Mr. Beat's mother's side, but there was one ancestor from Mr. Beat's paternal side who is also a Patriot ancestor. Now, going back to the tree and focusing back on Mr. Beat, we're going to go up Mr. Beat's paternal line, and we're going to scroll our way through over here to the Struble line. Now, this is a very interesting line, and most of Mr. Beat's father's side seems to have some sort of German connection, except for his Irish ancestry that's hiding in there. But for everything that we've seen, it's mostly this sort of German connection. And for the Strubles, we notice that Johann Dietrich Struble I, born 1714, lived to 1809. So when we pull him up, we get a lot of good information, and we're going to pull up his actual profile. So we see there's a stone. We see there's multiple different documents connected. There's a lot of discussions and different things going on. We have 4 different sources. So here we have sources, one family search family tree, which I don't really consider a true source. Any sort of family trees are not really a source, in my opinion. at least not a very confident source. But when we look at that overview, it gives a really good look at Dietrich Strubel's life. Now, the story is that Dietrich Strubel became an indentured servant to a man who lived in Allentown, Pennsylvania. That man and many of the people that lived around him would then become loyalists. But Dietrich Strubel was not a loyalist. He was a patriot. So once he was able to pay off his indentured servitude by working as a stonemason, he ended up moving to New Jersey. Now, I've already been in touch with the DAR and SAR chapters that would be associated with where Mr. Beat lives. So that's Daughters of the American Revolution, Sons of the American Revolution, for those who don't know. And I was able to confirm that the ancestors that Mr. Beat has are confirmed Patriot ancestors, which we can basically see off the bat, and he is eligible to apply for membership. So they actually have it set up in case he does want to pursue membership, or if his mom or sister or any family members want to pursue membership, they will be able to.
I'm David Allen Lambert. I'm the Chief Genealogist for the New England Historic Genealogical Society in Boston, Massachusetts. Our website is AmericanAncestors.org. We're the oldest genealogical organization in America. We are 176 years old, founded in 1845. We have over 250,000 constituents around the world. We have an 8-story research center in Boston, and we are growing. We have acquired the building next door, so we're not just a .com. We have nearly 100 employees. I've been with the organization for 28 years, but that's just scratching the surface for me because I started doing genealogy when I was 7, and that would be 45 years ago. So I'm delighted to share a little bit of a fragment of Mr. Beat's history for his own family. Fast forward to my interest in the Revolution. My grandmother would bring me around to the graves of where her family were buried, and I always was really intrigued by this marker. And it was an iron marker for the SAR with a flag on it, and she told me that this was where her great-great-grandfather was buried. And sure enough, this is my 4th great-grandfather, who I joined, Captain Jonathan Poor. He marched on the alarm of April the 19th, 1775, with a group of men from Newbury, Massachusetts. So I decided to join the SAR. Well, I jumped in with both feet. I've now served as their curator, as well as being their state historian now for under 2 presidencies of our state. And I'm a member of the Boston chapter. You know, one of the things I think is really fun is that a lot of people go to the DAR website, but they don't know about the great website we have on the SAR. That's not to discount the great website on the DAR. So let me show you ours. So what I have here is called the Patriot Research System, or our PRS. So you can do a search on a patriot, a member, or a descendant. You can even do a biography search if one is there, or even a cemetery search. So in Mr. Beat's ancestry, you had mentioned a couple of possible ancestors that he had who served in the Revolution. Want to try to look for one?
Yeah, let's do that. So in our video, we discuss Johann Dietrich Strubel.
Okay.
So let's see if we can find him.
All right. I'm going to take a gander here that Strubel is spelled this way. Could have a E in front of it as well. And you can also do the sounds like, which is what I've got. So let's see how many Strubels we have. We've got a Johannes Dietrich Strubel in New Jersey, patriotic service. Born in 1714. Does that sound like your man?
That sounds like him.
Okay. So what you can do here is you can hover over, and this is all free, just like the DAR website. So you can hover over the Patriot number here, and that pulls up a bit of a breakdown. And it says this comes from numerous sources, and it's part of the application of 2 people that joined within the past 10 years. So in fact, one of them joined just 2 years ago. 2019 and 2014. So unlike a lot of the old applications, sometimes you'll find old SAR applications on Ancestry. Someone may have filled out in, say, 1914. It's going to need to be reworked because a lot of times it was just word of mouth, or, well, they just put it down and say, well, my grandfather was the veteran, so of course I can join, right? So they didn't ask for proofs. Well, now we ask for proofs. Birth, marriage, and death for every generation going all the way down to you. Back to the actual Patriot service candidate or someone who was a soldier. So in this case, we know that He was born in, looks like Germany, 1714. And then he looks like he lived to be maybe just shy of 100 years old when he died in Union, Pennsylvania. Well, it looks like we've got the right person. And why he has patriotic service, which is a little different. So with the SAR Nadia, or you can join under patriotic service, something that you did that contributed to the cause of the American Revolution. So that case, he actually signed an oath. And he was also a member of the Council of Safety, or actually the Committee of Safety. And what he did there is they were very concerned with what was going on in the war, and raising money, looking for supplies, etc., and were overall considered patriotic for their cause. I mean, obviously in 1714, it's a little older to be shouldering a musket and marching 100 miles. So I think that he did a fair share for that. So if you go here, you can actually click on the actual application, and it gives you sort of the data from it. And then you can purchase it if you want, and we charge $10 for the application, which I think is pretty fair. You get the original, and if you tie into one of the later ones, chances are all of that hard work you need to do might parallel your own line, and you only have to get the more recent applications and maybe compare notes. Yeah, it's great. The SAR is a great organization, and I've been, like I say, just been a member for a few years. And I've enjoyed it thoroughly.
But one really interesting thing about Dietrich, and going back to the family tree, we see with his father, Andreas Struble, Andreas actually had a sister. And that sister would end up marrying a man by the name of Eisenhower. And for anybody who remembers episode 3, Struble is the family through which Mr. Beat is related to Dwight D. Eisenhower. And it is through this aunt of Johann Dietrich Struble, or Andreas Struble's sister. And I was actually able to find an extremely interesting page that was digitized from a book about the family. So here we have the digitized pages 452 and 453 from the Eisenhower genealogy, a postscript by Hans F. Friedrichs. The man who would marry Andreas Struble's sister was HansNicholas Eisenhower, and he settled in northwest area of Fredericksburg, Pennsylvania, in what was known as Bithell Township, then in Lancaster County. It's actually noted in the Pennsylvania Gazette that on August 12, 1756, it was reported that Indians had burned the log house of Nicholas Eisenhower. Now, before Eisenhower had immigrated to America, the Struble family had immigrated first. Andreas's brother Friedrich had landed in Philadelphia back in 1731, and later he would then go to Hessen to find a wife. And it was at this wedding, which was on April 18, 1741, in Neunheim across the Neckar from Heidelberg, that HansNicholas Eisenhower, who was a husband of Anna Margaretha Struble, which is Friedrich's sister, was in attendance. Friedrich gave such an enthusiastic account of Pennsylvania that HansNicholas Eisenhower decided to follow the Strubles to Pennsylvania. So had it not been for Friedrich Struble, Mr. Beat's great-great-great-great-great-great uncle, the Eisenhowers, specifically HansNicholas Eisenhower, would not have come to the US. Now that's it for today's episode, but on next week's episode, we're going to start looking into some family tree lines of Mr. Beat that trace a little deeper into American history. Well, thank you so much for checking out this video. I do hope that you enjoyed. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. That really does help me out. If you'd like to get access to my content early, or even get access to exclusive content, be sure to become a Patreon patron of mine. And not only will you get all of that access, but you'll also be helping in supporting the channel. If you'd like to subscribe to my channel, you just need to click right about here. It is completely free to do so. And you can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at GeneaVlogger. I'm the GeneaVlogger. See you in my next video.